I used to feel safe in my house. It's small, quiet, and mine. At least that's what I thought. That illusion shattered this morning when I checked my security footage. I wasn't looking for anything unusual, not really. I'd installed the camera on a paranoid whim after hearing about some break-ins nearby, but I never actually expected to use them. And then I saw me. I wasn't sleeping at 3:13 a.m. like I thought I was. I was standing in the middle of my living room, staring into the camera, not at the lens, at me through the screen. My eyes were wide open, my lips curved into a slow, unnatural smile. But here's the thing, I don't remember any of it. I don't remember walking around. I don't remember smiling. And I sure as hell don't remember mouthing the words I saw on the playback. I'm still here. I froze, my finger hovering over the pause button, my chest tightening like a vice. The grainy footage stared back at me, daring me to hit play, but I couldn't. I couldn't make myself watch. Whatever came next, the words, "I'm still here," seemed to echo in my head, even though the footage was silent. It didn't make sense. I don't sleepwalk. I've never sleepwalked, not even as a kid. But there it was, swaying slightly in the middle of my living room like some puppet on invisible strings. My mind scrambled for answers. Maybe it was stress. Maybe I was dreaming. But no, the time stamp was real. The footage was real. That was me. Except it wasn't, was it? I felt an almost magnetic pull to hit play again, to keep watching. Maybe if I saw more, it would make sense. Maybe there was some trick of light, some rational explanation that I hadn't caught. The first time, my thumb slid down, trembling slightly, and I pressed the space bar. The video resumed. I watched as I stood there, perfectly still, the smile never faltering. Then, in one slow, fluid movement, I tilted my head to the side like I was listening to something. My lips moved again, but I couldn't make out the words this time. I leaned in closer to the screen, straining to see, but the camera's microphone had picked up nothing, just static. And then I did something that made my stomach twist into knots. I raised a hand and pointed directly at the camera, not at the lens, but at the screen itself, at me, watching. My laptop slammed shut before I even realized I'd moved. My breathing was shallow, ragged, as if the version of me in the footage had reached through the screen and stolen the air from my lungs. What the hell was happening? I tried to shake it off, to think logically. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself. Maybe the camera glitched or some software got corrupted or, God, I don't know, maybe someone hacked into the system. None of it made sense, but the alternative, that I had somehow been awake, wandering, smiling, and mouthing words I didn't remember, made even less sense. The room felt suddenly cold, too cold, like the kind of chill that creeps under your skin. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my phone and keys, threw on a jacket, and left the house, slamming the door behind me like I could shut out the whole damn thing. But as I backed out of the driveway, a thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd only checked the footage from the living room. What if I had been somewhere else too? The thought stuck in my head like a splinter. If I had been in the living room, what were the chances that was the only place I'd been? My house has 5 cameras. 5. 1 in the living room, 1 by the front door, 1 in the kitchen, and 2 upstairs, the hallway and my bedroom. I told myself not to go back. Whatever I'd seen was more than enough to ruin my day, maybe my week. I could deal with it later, in broad daylight, with a cup of coffee and maybe a friend over for support. But even as I drove aimlessly through town, the idea of the other footage gnawed at me. What if there was something worse? My stomach churned at the thought, and before I even realized what I was doing, I'd turned the car around. 15 minutes later, I was back in my driveway, the house looming dark and uninviting. The cold air that had driven me out earlier seemed to cling to the windows, frost curling at the edges of the glass like skeletal fingers. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my heart pounding like a drum. Everything was just as I'd left it, empty, quiet still, but it didn't feel right. The air was thick, pressing against my chest, like a weight. I set my laptop on the kitchen table, plugged it in, and pulled up the camera feeds again. With the front door fast-forwarding through hours of nothing, at 3:13 a.m., the same time as the living room footage, I saw the front door open. I walked out. And then I walked back in. It wasn't a quick in and out. The video showed me standing outside for almost 5 minutes, just staring into the dark street. I didn't move, didn't shift my weight, didn't even blink. And then I turned and walked back inside, closing the door softly behind me. I felt sick. My vision blurred as I switched to the kitchen feed. This one was worse. At 3:16 a.m., I appeared again, standing in the middle of the kitchen. My head was tilted to one side, like I was studying something just out of frame. Then I started moving, slow and deliberate, opening drawers and cabinets, taking things out and putting them back in the wrong places. Finally, at 3:21 a.m., I reached into the silverware drawer and pulled out a knife, not a small one, a long serrated bread knife. My grip on the handle was loose, casual, like I wasn't even paying attention to what I was holding, and then I left the frame. Where the hell had I gone next? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a bead of sweat rolling down my temple. I knew where I had to check next, the hallway camera, the one that pointed upstairs, toward my bedroom. I hesitated. If I watched this footage, there was no going back, no pretending this was some bizarre prank or glitch, but I had to know. The hallway feed started out uneventful. At 3:23 a.m., the same time I'd left the kitchen, I appeared at the bottom of the stairs. The knife glinted in my hand as I climbed, one slow step at a time. When I reached the top of the stairs, I didn't stop. I turned and walked straight into my bedroom. My blood ran cold. Switching to the bedroom feed felt like flipping open a coffin lid. I forced myself to press play. At 3:24 a.m., the door creaked open, and there I was, standing in the doorway. The angle didn't show the bed directly, but I could see the edge of the mattress. I watched myself step closer, the knife hanging loosely at my side. And then I froze. Not me, sitting at the table, me on the footage. I stood there motionless, staring down at what must have been my sleeping body just out of frame. My head tilted again, that same unnatural angle, and then my lips moved. This time, the microphone picked up the sound. You'll never leave. The whisper sent a jolt through me, and I slammed the laptop shut again, my hands trembling. My pulse pounded in my ears, and the room seemed to shrink around me. I was awake now, fully awake, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house anymore. Not alone at all. I couldn't. Every creak, every gust of wind outside felt like a signal, like someone was moving closer. The words from the footage, "You'll never leave," echoed in my mind, replaying with every heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee with shaking hands, staring at the laptop I'd closed hours ago. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. I decided to check the house, not casually, but thoroughly, room by room. I needed to prove to myself that this was just my imagination playing tricks on me, that I hadn't actually been walking around with a knife in my hand while whispering to my unconscious self. The search started in the living room. Everything was where it should be. The furniture, the faintly glowing security camera in the corner. Next, I moved to the kitchen. The drawers I'd seen myself rummaging through in the footage were all in order. Even the silverware drawer looked untouched. The knife I'd seen myself holding was still in its place, resting in its wooden slot, as if nothing had happened. But when I went upstairs, my stomach dropped. The bedroom was wrong. The first thing I noticed was the mirror on the far wall. It was cracked, a jagged line running straight down the middle, splitting my reflection in two. I hadn't noticed it last night, but maybe it was too panicked to see. My bed was another story. The sheets were rumpled, but not from sleeping. The mattress looked disturbed, as if someone had been standing on it. And then there was the smell, faint but unmistakable, like earth and mildew. It was coming from the corner of the room near the closet. My breath caught as I stepped closer, the boards creaking underfoot. I crouched down and realized the smell was strongest near the floor. I peeled back the edge of the carpet. Beneath it was an old trapdoor, the wood warped and damp. It looked ancient, far older than the house itself. My first instinct was to cover it back up and pretend I hadn't seen it, but that wasn't an option anymore. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy candlestick, and pried the trapdoor open. The hinges groaned, protesting as I forced it upward, revealing a dark, narrow hole. A faint draft rose from below, carrying that same earthy smell. And then I saw them. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were smaller, lighter, as if someone else had been walking through the space below the house. A part of me wanted to slam the door shut and run, but I couldn't. If I left now, I'd never know. What was down there? What was happening to me? I grabbed a flashlight and lowered myself into the darkness. The air grew colder as I climbed down, my hand gripping the ladder tightly. When my feet touched the ground, the flashlight beam swept across the dirt floor. At first, I thought it was empty, just an old crawl space filled with cobwebs and debris. And then I saw the markings. Symbols drawn in the dirt surrounding a single ancient-looking box. The symbols were crude, but deliberate, carved deeply into the earth. They were the same ones I'd seen scratched into the walls of my dream, the dream I was starting to think wasn't a dream at all. My hands trembled as I reached for the box. It was heavy, the wood damp and swollen, like it had been buried for years. The moment I touched it, the flashlight flickered, and then the whisper came again. "You'll never leave." This time, it wasn't coming from the footage. It was coming from the dark behind me. The whisper froze me in place. My heart pounded as the words hung in the air, seeping into my bones. I wanted to turn around, to shine the flashlight into the dark space behind me, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. The box. I focused on the box in my hands, the rough wood pressing into my palms. It felt heavier now, like it was alive, pulling me down with its weight. I had to open it. I knew that. Much. Whatever answers I was looking for were inside. With a deep breath, I forced the lid open. The smell hit me first, earthy, rotting, suffocating. Inside was a bundle of old, yellowed photographs tied together with string. My trembling fingers fumbled as I lifted them out. The first few photos were black and white, blurry images of a man standing in the living room of my house, his face obscured. The next photo made my stomach drop. It was me. Same face, same clothes, same house. But the photo was dated decades before I'd even been born. I flipped through the rest faster now, my hands shaking uncontrollably. In each photo, I was doing something different, standing at the front door, staring into the mirror, or walking up the stairs. The last photo showed me crouched in this very crawl space, my face twisted into that same unnatural smile I'd seen in the footage. And then the flashlight died. Darkness swallowed me, thick and complete. I scrambled to turn it back on, my breathing ragged. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices now, all overlapping. "You let me in. You'll never leave. You are me." A cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around, swinging the flashlight wildly, and it flickered back to life for just a moment. Beam landed on a figure, me. It wasn't just my face. It was my clothes, my posture, my expression, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, the eyes too dark. The other me tilted its head and took a step closer, the whispers growing louder with each movement. I stumbled back, dropping the box and scattering the photos. My heel caught on the edge of the ladder and I fell hard, the impact jarring my entire body. The figure crouched now, inches from my face, its smile twisted further, splitting its lips, revealing rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. "You should have stayed asleep," it hissed. In a blind panic, I grabbed one of the photos, its edge sharp enough to cut. My hand found the flashlight, and I flicked it back on, illuminating the thing's face. For the first time, its smile faltered. I slashed the photo across its face. The thing screamed, a sound that was more like a shattering glass than a human voice. Darkness writhed around me, and the crawl space seemed to close in. I scrambled up the ladder, ignoring the burn in my legs, the thing's guttural cries chasing me. When I reached the top, I slammed the trapdoor shut, throwing myself against it. The house was still, silent. I just sat there on the floor, trembling, staring at the trapdoor. I don't know how long I stayed. Like that, minutes, hours, it didn't matter. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I grabbed every camera in the house, ripping them down one by one. The laptop, the photos, the box. I threw them all into the fireplace and watched the flames consume them. The heat made my skin sting, but I didn't care. I needed it. Gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for days. I packed a bag and left the house, renting a room in a dingy motel on the other side of town. But leaving didn't help. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth. I glanced up into the mirror and saw it, my reflection smiling back at me, wide and wrong. It happened again while I was walking past a shop window. The version of me in the glass didn't walk at the same pace. The worst was last night. I woke up to the sound of whispers, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby. The bed was cold, and when I turned on the light, I saw them, dirty, damp footprints leading from the corner of the room to my bedside. The last photo I'd burned had been of me crouching in the crawlspace, but just before I lit the match, I'd noticed something in the corner of the frame I hadn't seen before. A second box. Somewhere, still waiting. What would you do if you saw yourself in your own security footage? Would you dare to look further, or leave the past buried? Share your thoughts below and let us know how you'd confront this chilling mystery. The basement always felt wrong. It wasn't anything I could explain, just a feeling, a strange heaviness in the air. I'd avoided spending much time down there since moving in, but when the floorboards started to warp, I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my tools and set to work, determined to get the job done quickly. That's when I found the hatch. I almost didn't notice it. The edges were covered in grime, blending perfectly with the old wood around it, but when I stepped on it, the hollow sound beneath my boots caught my attention. I crouched down and brushed away the dirt, revealing iron bolts so rusted they flaked under my fingers. It took almost an hour to pry it open. When I finally did, I was met with a gaping black void. Tunnel. The air was thick and cold, rushing up at me like an exhale from something alive. It smelled sharp, metallic, with a faint hint of rot. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but I could see enough to know one thing: this tunnel shouldn't be here. I stared into the void for what felt like forever, torn between two thoughts. Go back upstairs. Forget you saw this. Or find out where it leads. The choice didn't feel like a choice at all. I couldn't go back upstairs, not without knowing what was down there. My heart was hammering in my chest. Something stronger, curiosity or maybe stupidity, pushed me forward. I grabbed the flashlight, adjusted its beam, and lowered myself into the tunnel. The air grew colder as I descended, biting against my skin like winter's breath. The ladder creaked under my weight, the wood damp and spongy. It felt ancient, like it might snap if I moved too fast. When my feet finally touched the ground, the darkness swallowed me whole. I shined the flashlight around, illuminating stone walls lined with wooden supports. They were splintered and rotting, as though they'd been here far longer than the house itself. The ground beneath me was packed dirt, uneven and riddled with small puddles that reflected the weak light. The tunnel stretched endlessly in both directions, but something about the air pulled me deeper. Like an invisible hand urging me forward, the flashlight caught faint marks on the walls. Scratches, maybe, or carvings. I stepped closer, running my fingers over them. Jagged, deliberate, but they didn't form anything I recognized. They looked almost like symbols, but the longer I stared, the more they seemed to shift under my gaze. My chest tightened as I moved deeper into the tunnel. The air felt heavier now, clinging to me. Like wet fabric, every step echoed unnaturally, as if the tunnel stretched far beyond what the space should allow. That's when I heard it. A noise, faint and distant, barely louder than the sound of my own breathing. I froze, straining to listen. It came again, soft and rhythmic, like a whisper. "Hello," my voice broke the silence, shaky and uncertain. The whisper stopped. I stood there, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached, scanning the darkness ahead. The beam of light flickered, the shadows around me shifting like they were alive. I told myself it was just the air or my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. Something was down here. For a moment, the silence pressed down on me so hard I thought I might suffocate. My breathing sounded loud and alien, too harsh against the stillness of the tunnel. The whisper hadn't answered, but the air felt different now, charged, like something was watching me. I forced my legs to move, one step at a time, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across the walls. The carvings became more frequent the further I went, deeper grooves and more erratic patterns. Some symbols looked like they'd been scratched in a frenzy, while others were almost ornate. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to climb that ladder and seal the hatch shut, to forget I ever found this place. But my curiosity had shifted into something else. Now, it wasn't just a question of what was down here. It felt like the tunnel itself was pulling me forward, as though the choice was no longer mine to make. The whisper returned. This time, it was closer. It wasn't just a sound. It was a voice, clearer now but still faint, like someone speaking from just around the corner. My name was in it, Alex. I froze again, whipping the flashlight toward the sound, but the tunnel ahead was empty. The beam danced across damp stone and dirt, picking up nothing but the endless stretch of shadow. "Who's there?" I called, louder this time, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound firm. No response. The flashlight flickered again, the bulb dimming for a moment before returning to full strength. When the beam steadied, it landed on something new, something that hadn't been there before. A lantern. It was old, its metal rusted and its glass smeared with grime. The flame inside flickered weakly, but it was unmistakably lit. My stomach churned as I approached it. I didn't want to touch it, but I crouched low to examine it more closely. The base of the lantern was surrounded by scratches in the dirt, not symbols this time. Claw. Marks. And just beyond the lantern, half buried in the dirt, was something worse. Bones. They were small, scattered, and unnervingly clean. From an animal, but that lie crumbled the moment I spotted a skull, human and unmistakable, staring blankly into the void. Something moved behind me. A soft scuffle of dirt so quiet I almost missed it. I turned, flashlight raised, but the tunnel was empty. Still, the air felt thicker now, oppressive. I wasn't alone anymore. The next steps were slower, more deliberate. My grip on the flashlight was slippery with sweat. But I held it steady as I moved deeper into the tunnel, my ears strained for any sound, any sign that I wasn't just losing my mind. The carvings had changed again. They weren't symbols anymore. They were words, carved deeply into the stone walls. I didn't recognize the language. It was jagged, angular, full of harsh lines and sharp edges. But something about it felt wrong. Just looking at the words made my head throb. The whispers were constant now, rising and falling like breaths, wrapping around me from every direction. The voice wasn't just calling my name anymore. It was speaking. Not words I could understand, but something guttural and rhythmic, like a chant. I came to a sharp turn in the tunnel. The beam of the flashlight revealed more markings on the walls, deeper and more frantic. The claw marks gouged into the stone looked fresher now, like they'd been made recently. As I turned the corner, the tunnel opened into a larger space. The ceiling arched high above me, disappearing into the shadows, and the walls were lined with more lanterns, their flames faint but steady. In the center of the room stood a massive iron door. It towered over me, its surface covered in carvings that made my skin crawl. The images depicted human figures, twisted and contorted, their faces frozen in agony. Around them were the same symbols and words I'd seen in the tunnel, etched so deeply into the metal that it looked like they'd been clawed in by hand. My flashlight dimmed again, flickering weakly as the whispers grew louder. They came from behind the door now, rhythmic and insistent. And then I saw it. The carvings weren't just scratches, they were moving. The figures on the door writhed and shifted, their faces twisting as though they were alive. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, and the beam rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows against the walls. Something stepped into the light. At first I thought it was human, but the proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid. Its face was obscured by a mask, crude and jagged, made of what looked like bone. It tilted its head, watching me in silence. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely audible over the whispers that now felt deafening. The figure didn't respond. It just raised a hand and pointed to the door. The meaning was clear. I had to open it. "No," I said, shaking my head. My voice wavered, barely audible over the whispers pounding in my ears. "I'm not opening it." The figure didn't move. It just stood there, hands still raised, its bony mask tilted slightly as if studying me. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, distorting the room, but I stayed frozen, unable to look away. The whispers shifted, rising into a low, guttural chant. They didn't just echo in the room. They pressed against my skull, each syllable carving its way into my mind. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the flashlight. My hand scrambled for it, gripping it tightly as I swung the beam toward the figure. The light hit the mask, and for the first time it flinched. That was enough. I grabbed the flashlight and bolted, running back toward the tunnel, the iron door and its keeper disappearing behind me. But the tunnel wasn't the same anymore. The walls seemed to shift and writhe as I ran, the markings glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. My own breath echoed unnaturally, overlapping itself in a way that made my head spin. The whispers followed me, louder and angrier now. "You can't leave. You're part of it now." I didn't care. I kept running, ignoring the burning in my legs and the tightening in my chest. The ladder came into view, bathed in the weak glow of the flashlight. Relief surged through me as I reached it, gripping the rungs and pulling myself upward. The whispers screamed now, a furious roar that shook the tunnel. The air grew thick, oppressive, as though the tunnel itself was trying to drag me back. My head broke through the hatch, and I scrambled onto the basement floor, kicking the trapdoor shut behind me. I grabbed a nearby toolbox and slammed it down on top of the hatch, piling anything I could find to weigh it down. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the silence felt like a blessing, but it wasn't right. It was too quiet. I turned to leave the basement, but froze. The walls were covered in markings. The same jagged symbols I'd seen in the tunnel were now etched into the concrete, glowing faintly in the dim light. My stomach twisted as I realized they hadn't been there before. And then I heard it again. The whisper. But it wasn't coming from the hatch anymore. It was behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran upstairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. Didn't feel like enough, but it was all I could do. The house felt different now, colder, darker. The air carried the same metallic tang I'd smelled in. The tunnel, sharp and suffocating. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was over. I didn't go back to the basement. I didn't open the hatch. I barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan the old house made. But it wasn't over. The first night, I heard the whispers again, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from beneath them. Floorboards. I told myself it was my imagination. The second night, the markings started appearing upstairs, faint scratches on the walls and ceiling growing deeper and more intricate as the hours passed. Last night I woke up to find the door to the basement open. I'm sitting in the living room now, writing this. The whispers are louder than ever, and I can feel the air growing heavier around me. The lights flicker, shadows creeping closer with every moment. The hatch isn't just a part of the basement. It's a part of this house now. And soon, I think it'll be a part of me too. If you found a mysterious tunnel beneath your house, would you explore it or seal it up forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share this story with your bravest friends. Help me. I thought I imagined it, a whisper, barely audible, cutting through the stillness of my apartment. It was late and I'd been staring at my laptop screen for hours trying to finish a project. I turned down my music and sat there listening. Nothing. I laughed nervously at myself, shaking my head. Get a grip, Emily, I muttered, cranking up the volume. Again. But just as I started typing, the whisper came again. Help me. This time it sounded closer, almost as if someone were standing right behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The room was empty. I sat there for a moment, staring into the empty room, the glow of my laptop screen casting long shadows across the walls. My heart was still racing, pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The apartment felt suddenly unfamiliar, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but heavy, almost suffocating. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than they should have been, almost alive, shifting just out of the corner of my eye. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the result of working too many late nights and not enough sleep. Taking a deep breath, I forced a laugh. Seriously, Emily, you've been watching too many horror movies. I said it out loud, hoping the sound of my voice would ground me, make me feel less alone. I reached for my cup of coffee on the table, but my hand froze halfway there. Chill tabby cat was perched on the back of the couch. His ears were flat, his tail puffed up, and he was glaring, at the wall behind me. He let out a low, rumbling hiss, something I'd never heard him do before. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just the bare, off-white wall. I forced myself to breathe, though every instinct told me to grab Mochi and leave. Instead, I scooped him up and carried him to my bedroom, shutting the door behind us. For the rest of the night, I tried to work, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept darting to the living room, to that wall, and every little creak of the floorboards made me jump. The apartment that had always felt small and cozy now felt too large, like I wasn't alone anymore. Something was wrong. By the time I crawled into bed, I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and Mochi's quiet breathing next to me. And somewhere in the stillness, I swore I heard it again. Help me. This time, it sounded muffled, as though it was coming from inside the walls. I shot upright in bed, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But where would I go? The voice was faint, muffled, almost as if it were trapped behind drywall. I stared at the wall opposite my bed, my breath shallow, my chest tightening with every second of silence. Mochi stirred beside me, his ears flicking toward the sound I'd heard, as if he had heard it too. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed, eyes darting between the door to the living room and the clock on my nightstand, waiting for the first hint of sunlight. The next morning, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Lack of sleep, stress from work. It had to be that. To shake off the paranoia, I threw myself into cleaning the apartment even, organizing the mess of wires and notebooks on my desk. It was during this tidying frenzy that I noticed something odd. Mochi wouldn't leave my side. Usually, he'd be lounging on the windowsill or chasing imaginary prey around the apartment, but today he trailed me like a shadow, his tail low, eyes wide and watchful. By evening, the tension in the apartment had only grown worse. Every little sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, even my own footsteps, seemed amplified, unnatural. I found myself pausing frequently, head cocked to one side, listening for, what, that voice? And then it came again. Help me! This time, I was in the living room, sitting at my desk. The voice wasn't faint or muffled. It was clear and desperate, cutting through the silence like a knife. I jumped to my feet, my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. It was coming from the wall right behind me. I pressed my ear to the wall, my hands trembling. I didn't want to hear it again, but I needed to. No, my breath fogged the wall as I strained to listen. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then came a faint rustling, like someone or something dragging themselves through the walls. My stomach twisted as I stumbled back, nearly tripping over Machi, who let out a terrified yowl. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Sarah. Something's wrong here, I whispered. Into the phone, pacing the length of the room, I told her about the whispers, about Mochi's strange behavior, about the rustling. Sarah, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. You've been cooped up for too long. Get some air. And maybe stop watching those ghost hunter shows. I tried to laugh with her, but it came out shaky and forced. Yeah, maybe. But even as I said it, I glanced at the wall. I knew this wasn't just in my head. Something was in there, and it needed me to hear it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Sarah's dismissive words stuck in my head, but deep down I knew. This wasn't just stress or my imagination. Something was wrong, and it was in these walls. I stayed in the living room, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a kitchen knife, completely. Ridiculous, I know, but it was all I could think of. Mochi crouched on the armrest of the couch, his wide eyes fixed on the wall where I'd heard the whisper. For a while, everything was quiet. I started to feel foolish sitting there, my heart racing over. Nothing, but then, just as my grip on the knife loosened, it started. A faint scratching sound, soft at first, like fingernails against wood. Then the whisper came. Again, louder this time, more insistent. Help me. The sound seemed to move, shifting from one part of the wall to another, as if it was trying to find a way out. My hands shook as I pointed the flashlight at the wall. The beam of light illuminated the cracks in the peeling wallpaper, the faded yellow stains that seemed to pulse in the flickering glow. I couldn't take it anymore. Before I could stop myself, I yanked at the corner of the wallpaper. It came away in a long, damp strip, revealing bare plaster beneath. I kept pulling, the adrenaline driving me as I uncovered more of the wall. That's when I saw them. Words, faint, scrawled messages etched into the plaster. Help me, trapped, find me. Each plea seemed more frantic than the last, the letters smeared and jagged, as if written in desperation. My breath caught in my throat, and the room seemed to grow colder. I reached out, touching the wall. It felt wrong, too cold, too smooth, almost wet. Then I heard it again, the voice, louder this time, as if it was right behind me. Help me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. Mochi hissed, his fur standing on end, his wide eyes fixed on one specific spot on the wall. I didn't want to do it, but something compelled me to act. I grabbed the hammer I'd left by the couch from earlier cleaning and swung it against the wall. The drywall cracked, a deep echo filling the apartment as I struck again. On the third swing, the hammer broke through, and a hollow space behind the wall was revealed. Dust and crumbled plaster filled the air, but I didn't stop. I tore at the broken edges with my hands, desperate to see what was inside. And then I saw it, a hand, skeletal, gray, and curled as though it had been clawing at the inside of the wall for decades. My stomach turned and I fell backward, choking on the air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. The whisper stopped. The room fell silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching me from that dark, gaping hole in the wall. I don't remember calling the police. All I know is that within hours my apartment was swarming, with officers, crime scene tape sectioning off the living room, and the muffled chatter of investigators filling the air. I sat on the couch, clutching a blanket someone had draped over me, staring numbly at the gaping hole in the wall. They uncovered more than I expected. What started as a single skeletal hand turned into a hidden chamber filled with remains. The forensic team speculated that these were victims from decades ago, people who had either been trapped or hidden during the hospital fire that had destroyed the original structure before the apartment complex was built. I told them about the whispers, about the scrawled messages behind the wallpaper. They exchanged glances but didn't question me. I think they could feel it too, the weight of the apartment, the lingering chill that seeped into your bones when you stood too close to that wall. The whispers never came back after that night, but neither did my sense of peace there anymore. I packed up what I could carry and moved out the following week. Even then, I kept the lights on in my new place for weeks, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. Mochi seemed calmer in the new apartment, though he still avoided dark corners. I wasn't so lucky. I couldn't stop the dreams. Every night I saw that skeletal hand reaching out of the wall, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice, "Help me." Months later, I received a letter from the city, thanking me for helping uncover the remains of the hospital fire victims. They included a photograph of the excavation site, a grim, dark chamber filled with bones and tattered remnants of what used to be lives. But it wasn't the bones that caught my eye. It was the faint outline of something in the background, almost obscured by the shadows. A figure, barely visible, standing just beyond the camera's focus. I stared at the image for what felt like hours, unable to look away. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe it wasn't. But deep down I knew the truth. The whispers had stopped, but whatever was in those walls, it wasn't gone. It had just been waiting to be found. What would you do if you heard whispers coming from your walls? Share your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments below.